There are plenty of indicators telling us climate change is getting worse. Multiple areas of the country bracing to break new wildfire records each year, increasing extreme heat events like the one that just finally lifted in California, global sea levels rising, more massive debilitating storms like the typhoon that brought record-breaking rains to Japan, and the hurricane that brought crippling flooding and power outages first to Puerto Rico and now the Dominican Republic. Yet for some, it's not those things that sound the alarm, but rather this little guy, the Atlantic puffin. Adorable and seen by many as a report card for our climate action. The cleaner the environment, the more the puffins thrive, which gets a lot of people to pay attention. And photographer Derrick Jackson has spent many years drawing attention to those conservation efforts with books like Project Puffin. But these days, as he recently wrote in the Boston Globe, he's pushing his audiences to focus on the not-so-cute so-called sacrifice zones. Derrick Jackson, the Union of Concerned Scientists Fellow, Pulitzer Prize finalist, co-author and photographer of Project Puffin and the Puffin Plan, joins me now. Derrick, it's great to see you.
Thanks for having me on, Jim.
So you and the puffins go way back. We'll put up a few more of the beautiful photographs you took. So they go from slaughtered by humans at the end of the 19th century to miraculously restored by Steve Kress and others at near the end of the 20th century to at risk again. Why are they at risk? Explain why they're at risk now.
Sure. Climate change is the number one. Puffins all over the North Atlantic are under kind of an assault. Actually, in Europe, they're already listed as endangered because of pollution, overfishing, and climate change. Here in Maine and Canada, they're not endangered, but they're a bird of concern on the International Red List, and that's because now of climate change. So the best way to explain it is the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than almost all ocean bodies on Earth.
You should say that again. People have a hard time accepting that. It is one of the, if not the fastest warming body of water on the planet.
That's right. And that's because it has a unique confluence of currents that's being disrupted. For centuries, it was, quote, kind of balanced by the Gulf Stream coming up from the south, balanced by the Labrador Current coming down from the north. And with the melting sea ice up north, that Labrador Current has gotten slower, and the Gulf Stream is taking more precedence.
And that affects, obviously, what they can eat, and these puffins and that. Okay. So what's a sacrifice zone? I'm embarrassed to say I never read the term until I read your piece. What is it?
They are neighborhoods, usually communities of color, where have oil refineries, coal ash, all kinds of fossil fuel related and other industrial sites that just happen to be dumped there, and then the cycle of the real estate is poor, so only the poorest people can live in them.
Well, you make the point in your fine piece in the Globe that what's happening to the puffins and what's happening, for example, to mothers and children in Chicago with some toxic facility in the neighborhood are just two sides of the same coin, yes?
I believe so. If we can stop climate change, if we can curb our fossil fuels, we will curb the pollution in neighborhoods like Southeast Chicago and keep the waters relatively cool for puffins.
You know, I said to you, I was actually nervous to even ask you this question a year or so ago when you were here, I think I said something to you like, well, one of the reasons why people are so concerned about the future of the puffin, because it's about the cutest little bird on the planet. And much to my amazement, your response was, yes, that is true. And so I assume what you're saying is it's easy for the person sitting on the fence, even though no one should be sitting on the fence anymore about climate change, to relate to saving that puffin, but frankly, they don't give as much of a damn about environmental justice for a poor family in a city in America.
Right, and I think it's time that old lines of environmental thinking that focused on animals and land trusts and that sort of thing, that now there should no longer be any distinction between that and the environmental justice on dumped on families throughout this nation.
Do people get that? You know, I almost daily am so incredulous that people, other than Republicans who are getting fossil fuel contributions, and so it has nothing to do with the merits of the issue, it has to do with the only thing they stand for, which is re-election, and obviously the money helps. Do people get that? I think they hear about Greenland, they hear about extinction of a million species and that sort of thing. Do they get the whole notion of what's happening,
Well,
particularly lower income people in our cities?
Well, what I can tell you is that when I give this talk, I give this in the form of a talk on, I show photos of puffins, and then I show photos of the families, and also show positive things of families getting solar power in working class and low income communities, and I show offshore wind facilities from Europe. And when I give those talks to like bird watching groups, there might be a person in there that says, I didn't come here to get a political sermon, but most people really respond really positively and really understand that we're all connected now.
So what's the difference between that Chicago neighborhood you write about, and I think it's San Diego, where you said, is that where the solar panels are on, or wherever it was?
Well, San Diego's one of the cities.
Okay,
yes.
so what's the difference between, why does one get it and one clearly not?
Mainly it depends on what states and what localities have pilot programs and assertive programs to get solar on people's homes. New Orleans is a place where, and there are very different programs in different places. It's really, for instance, like if you can bring it home to Massachusetts, we hardly have the most sun in the United States, and yet solar adoption, because of the strong policies that began under Governor Patrick, Massachusetts has routinely been in the top 10 of rooftop solar adoption. And so it really comes down to government strategies and government will to do it.
You've been spending almost 4 decades, I think, off and on with the Puffins. For those who don't know, you used to be a brilliant columnist at the Boston Globe in your former life. How much at risk are they? The notion that after this miraculous effort in the early 70s and beyond to restore them to existence and prosperity, for lack of a better expression, that could all fall apart. How much at risk are they?
Well, I'll tell you the story of the African penguin. The African penguin numbered in the millions of birds off South Africa and Namibia a century ago or a couple centuries ago. And even as recent as maybe 25 years ago, they were still at about 250,000 pairs. But because of pollution, overfishing, and climate change, they are now down to about 25,000 pairs in those countries. So puffins have proven to be an extremely resilient bird. They catch all kinds of fish. And it's just, as many of the researchers told me on these islands, the 20-somethings that take care of the birds now, it's like the question is, how much do we want to keep throwing at the birds?
Understood. By the way, if you want to learn more about the birds, one of his beautiful books, you'll learn a lot. It's called The Puffin Plan. It's right here. Check him out. It's terrific. And make the connection that Derrick Jackson's making for you. Derrick, it's great to see you.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Derrick Jackson.